It was Helena's first day of class at Sao Damiao State School. Recently graduated, she accepted the position as a substitute teacher to cover for a veteran teacher on leave. The principal, an austere lady named Ivone, greeted her coldly and quickly went over the instructions. At the end, she handed her the key to an isolated room at the back of the building, room 33. It's not used much, but it's functional. It's the only one available at the moment. Helena walked through the school corridors watching the students hurry by, some whispering to each other and glancing quickly in her direction. When she reached room 33, she noticed that the door was more worn than the others. The number, partially faded, looked like it had been repainted several times. The hallway there was colder, as if the sun avoided that corner. When she turned the key, the door creaked uncomfortably. Inside, old desks made of dark, scratched wood were lined up in rows. The blackboard still had traces of chalk, as if the previous class had just ended, even though the room had supposedly been out of use for years. A smell of mold and old chalk filled the air. Helena entered, trying to ignore her discomfort. She arranged her materials and waited for the students. To her surprise, at exactly 7:15, 12 students entered in complete silence. They sat down without complaining, without even looking at each other. None of them said a word. She tried to strike up a conversation, but they all kept their eyes fixed on her. Their faces were strangely pale, their uniforms old, some faded as if they had come out of an aged photograph. The class proceeded with forced normality. She gave explanations and they copied. No one asked questions. At the end, they got up at the same time and left in a line, like a single body divided into 12. Helena stood still, trying to understand what had happened. On her way out, she ran into the inspector and commented, "It seems that the students in room 33 are well behaved." The woman turned pale. "Who did you teach?" "The 12 students in room 33. They were all there." The inspector just shook her head slowly. Room 33 was deactivated in 1998. Since the fire. Helena couldn't sleep that night. The inspector's words echoed in her mind like a whisper that refused to go away. Since the fire. She tried to research what had happened, but found only a footnote in an old newspaper. Classroom fire causes panic, but no fatalities. The date, October 1998. No additional details, no names listed, no plausible explanation for the cause of the fire. The next day, she decided not to mention it to anyone. She thought maybe she had misunderstood, or that the inspector was just trying to scare her with old stories. Back in room 33, she found everything exactly as she had left it. The smell, the chalk marks, the slightly lower temperature. And, at exactly 7:15, the same 12 students entered. No one was late. No one said a word. Helena tried something different. She asked them to write an essay about their dreams. A simple exercise, used to break the ice. Everyone started writing at the same time, their handwriting meticulously identical. When she collected the papers, her heart raced. The essays were all about the same dream: a locked room, thick smoke, and a teacher screaming outside, unable to open the door. In all versions, the students were trapped, waiting for someone who never came. On the last sheet, however, there was a difference. A signature. Helena turned the paper over carefully and read, "Joanna M." The name sounded familiar, but she didn't know from where. She decided to look through the school's old records. At the end of the day, she went to Principal Ivone's office and asked for access to the physical archive. After some insistence, the principal allowed it, but with one condition. Don't touch the files from the old wing. Those shouldn't be touched. Helena nodded, but as soon as she was alone, she looked exactly where she had been told. The folders were yellowed and covered in dust. Among them, she found one with a partially faded label. Inside were student files from 1998. 12 names. 12 black and white photos. One of them was Joanna M. The same empty gaze. the same handwriting as the essay. At the end of the file, there was a handwritten note dated November 1998. Students died after smoke inhalation. The emergency gate was locked. The substitute teacher did not show up that day. Helena felt a tightness in her chest. She recognized the handwriting on the note. It was hers. Helena let the files fall to the floor. Her fingers trembled, sweat dripped from her temples. How could her handwriting be there, on a note from 1998, when she was only 7 years old at the time? She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone with the same name. But the handwriting, it was unmistakable. It was the same she used on tests, in her notes on the board, even on the notes she sent to the coordinator. That night, she had a dream. She was standing in front of room 33, holding a bunch of keys. Someone inside was shouting her name, banging on the locked door. The heat was unbearable, smoke was coming out through the cracks. But in the dream, she didn't open it. She simply turned her back and walked down the hallway. She woke up with a bitter taste in her mouth, and the smell of smoke still lingering in her nostrils. On the third day, she arrived at school determined to understand everything. She passed the reception without looking at anyone, and went straight to room 33. The door was ajar. When she pushed it open, the 12 students were already there, sitting motionless. Helena entered, took a deep breath, and asked, "Who are you?" For a moment, the silence seemed to scream. Then one of the girls, Joanna, slowly stood up and replied, "We're waiting for you to remember." Helena felt the floor sway beneath her feet. "Remember what?" "Your promise. You said you'd come back." She took a step back. "Is this some kind of play? A prank?" Another student, a tall boy with deep-set eyes, stood up as well. "You promised to get us out of here." The blackboard behind them began to creak, as if someone were scratching it from the inside. The desks shook slightly, and a cold breeze swept through the room, even though all the windows were closed. Helena tried to leave, but the door slammed shut with a metallic clang. She ran to the doorknob, but it was locked from the inside. She tried her cell phone, but there was no signal. When she turned around, the 12 students were now standing, all staring at her. "You're blaming me for something I didn't do," she said, panting. Joanna took a step forward. "But you were once one of us." At that moment, Helena felt the dizziness return. A deep buzzing filled her ears, and the room seemed to spin. Visions flashed through her mind. A room full of smoke, muffled screams, children banging on the door, and her outside, paralyzed with fear. She had turned her back, yes. She had run away. Maybe not in this life, but in a previous one. When consciousness returned, Helena was sitting in her own chair, in front of the blackboard now covered with words she didn't remember writing. Phrases repeated in different handwriting, but all with the same message. "You promised to open the door." The students were no longer at their desks. The room was empty, silent, but the air was thick with a suffocating density. Helena felt that something had broken inside her, a barrier that prevented old memories, buried under layers of forgotten lives, from resurfacing. She picked up the papers on the desk and leafed through them desperately, looking for any proof that this was just a delusion, a cruel trick of the mind. But the names of the 12 students appeared on every sheet, every note, every photograph: Joanna, Lucas, Beatriz, Marcelo. At the back of the room, she heard the sound of chalk being scratched against the blackboard. When she turned around, she saw the figure of a girl with her hair tied in 2 braids, writing slowly. Helena took a hesitant step toward her, but the girl disappeared before her eyes, like smoke. On the blackboard, only one sentence remained. "It's time for you to come in." Helena ran to the door again. It was unlocked. The hallway, once dark, was now empty. No sound of students, no buzz of the school in session. She walked through the hallways as if crossing a conscious nightmare, trying not to give in to panic. She stopped in front of the principal's office. The door was ajar. Inside, Principal Ivone was leafing through an old book. When she noticed Helena, She closed the tome with a bang. "You should have left it alone," she said in a low but firm voice. "It's not the first time they've tried to teach in that room." "Who are those children?" asked Helena, her throat dry. Yvonne sighed. She went to a cabinet and took out a yellowed envelope with a stamp from the Department of Education, dated 1999. She handed it over without saying a word. Inside was an official report on the closure of room 33. It stated that the substitute teacher assigned for the day of the fire never showed up. Her name was Helena M. Duarte. That's impossible. I wasn't old enough to be here in 1999. Yvonne replied with a tired look. "Are you sure?" Helena felt the words catch in her throat. Because at that moment, a memory surfaced like a thorn pushing the flesh from the inside out. An old staircase, a hallway from another era, and her, or someone just like her, running away as black smoke engulfed everything behind her. That night, Helena returned to school. She couldn't explain why. It was as if something inside her, something ancient and unavoidable, was pulling her back. The gates were open, even though the school was closed. Everything was dark, but she knew the way. It was as if she had walked that path 1,000 times. When she reached room 33, she saw that the door was wide open. The lights were strangely on. She entered slowly, feeling each step echo like a judgment. The desks were all occupied. The 12 students were waiting. But now they weren't just shadows. There were expressions on their faces. Expectation contained pain. They watched her in silence. In the center of the blackboard, written in white chalk, was just one question. "Are you going to open it now?" Helena walked to the desk, taking a deep breath. She sat down, as she had done on previous days, but this time there were no lessons. There were no papers, just a key on the desk. "That key!" Joanna stood up. "It's the same one you dropped before, in another life." The memories came back like an internal collapse. She saw herself young, scared, assigned to replace an absent teacher. She remembered arriving early at school, receiving the key to room 33, and hearing the fire alarm before she even reached the door. Fear made her hesitate. The smoke, the screams. The key fell to the floor and she ran away, convinced that nothing could be done. She never told anyone. She buried that memory so deep that it didn't even seem real. But now there, the faces stared back at her again. The victims of silence, of abandonment. Helena stood up, picked up the key, and walked to the back wall, where a side door, previously invisible, now stood marked by soot. She put the key in the lock. The handle turned with a heavy metallic click. The door opened with a creak that seemed to have been waiting decades. On the other side there was darkness, but within it faint glimmers, as if stars were trying to illuminate faded memories. The children got up and began to cross one by one. Joanna was the last. She stopped in front of Helena. "Thank you for remembering." When she disappeared, the room was empty. The key, still in Helena's hands, was now cold as stone. When she looked at the blackboard again, the words had changed. Justice served. The next morning, Principal Yvonne found room 33 clean, silent, and locked from the inside. When they broke it open, Helena was gone. On the table was only an envelope. "Freeing them was my sentence. I have fulfilled it." Since then, no one has been able to keep that classroom open. Every time someone tried to enter, the number on the door disappeared. Only one thing remained, a thin mark on the doorframe, as if small hands had desperately scratched at it from the inside, and a phrase written in chalk that never erases, even after cleaning. Memory is the key, and forgetting is the real punishment.